One of my earliest memories is as a wee boy on holiday in Montrose. My dad was studying for the Baptist ministry, didn't have much cash. We had a wee kind of house to duty thing. And I was running through the sand dunes. It must have been, I don't know, what would it be, 6 maybe? Running through the sand dunes in my wee trunks. And I wasn't Paul on holiday in Montrose, I was Tarzan. And I really was Tarzan. And I still remember this 50 years later, that sense of just sun and excitement and sand dunes and me being Tarzan and really believing it, you know. And there is something within children that makes the world a magical place. There is something within that we are born. A healthy child is born with a sense of wonder, and imagination can help them flip the most mundane and ordinary things in life into something quite wonderful, in which they usually have a very important role of some kind to save their family, to save the world, or whatever it might be. And when a child does not have that, you know that there's something wrong. So what has all of that got to do with what were two quite serious and quite heavy readings? I think as we come into Holy Week and we hear the story again, we can suffer from an overfamiliarity with the Passion narrative, with Jesus, oh yeah, you go to the cross and this all happens. And if the words are all familiar to us, we can say them in our sleep often. And that's great. It shows you just how impregnated, how saturated our own lives, and to some extent our Western heritage is with the Christian story. Countless pieces of architecture and art and poetry and literature, you cannot escape it within Western culture and civilization and history. It's quite remarkable. But familiarity breeds contempt. And one of the things in our very grown-up world today is that most folk are too grown up to believe the old stories. Most folk have too grown up to allow themselves to be vulnerable to disappointment when what they hope for does not come to pass. As adults, even as young adults, we quickly learn to not, that wee boy that runs around Tarzan running through the sand dunes becomes replaced with a slightly cynical late teenager who's kind of thinking, what's life really about? You know what I mean? And so it goes on. And our world, I would say today, particularly today, is in deep need of a re-enchantment, that there is big stories that are out there that really do matter, and that we have a place in them, no matter what the ordinariness of our lives, and the mundane details of our existence, picking up the kids, going to work, just putting the bread on the table, just keeping the show on the road as an older person, just getting up and brushing your teeth in the morning. All these things matter. And we have a place in a big cosmic drama, which, well, we saw in the collect. It's said to these, and that wonderful kind of opening sentence of the collect, most merciful God, who by the death and resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ, delivered and saved the world. I mean, you don't get a bigger drama than that. Delivered and saved the world. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about a change of government. We're not talking about a change of fashion. You know, Ina and I had the great joy of watching Bob Marley's One Love film on Friday, up in Dundee. I went to see. We were supposed to go for a walk, but the weather was awful, so we went to see a movie with Hannah and Julian. And Bob Marley's One Love is a great film. I've never sat to the end of when all the credits are rolling. We sat to the very end when all the credits are gone because they just kept playing music and you couldn't move, you couldn't leave the place. The music was just great. But one of the big things that comes across in that film is the constant tension for Bob Marley between his own personal safety and his life and his family's life and the utter chaos of Jamaica at that time and the civic disorder and the sheer violence that is on there. And the very powerful moment, fairly early on in the film, which is not going to spoil it because you watch it quite early in the film, when a young guy walks into where Bob is with a pistol to kill him, and Bob simply kind of stands there, and he doesn't try to dodge. The kid's just looking at him, raises his pistol, and Bob just kind of standing there, and gets shot a couple of times, and is wounded, but doesn't die, obviously. But the thing about Exodus, that album, which I didn't realize Time said was the most significant album of the 20th century, I had no idea about that. I think part of it is not just the music, it's not just the power of taking something that was quite a niche thing and making it mainstream. It was the fact that the lyrics were not about a teenager's broken heart. The lyrics were not just about somebody's personal angst. The lyrics were about civilizational change and about injustice, about big themes, and about a downtrodden minority people pushing back against the dominant narrative of that time and of their history. It had power in it because it believed in a bigger story that cost them something. And as I mean, Hannah says to us after, she probably won't be listening to this anyway. Hannah said to you, I didn't realize Bob Marley was so spiritual. It's like, what can you do with Generation Z, honestly, you know? I mean, Bob Marley is spiritual. He goes down to the deep roots of what he's there for, and it's a powerful, powerful narrative. But it was costly to him. It was costly to him. And all the big myths, all the big stories, and all the big stuff that moves people, the people who are in the middle of it pay a price. And that's what Jesus is saying here in Passiontide. He's saying, if you want to, these Greek, probably Jews of Greek extraction, probably that. We want to meet Jesus, and Jesus, there's so much I can say. I'm just going to focus on what he actually said. He talks about, unless a grain of seed falls into the ground and dies, it remains a single grain, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life will lose it. Those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. These are powerful, uncompromising words, as if Jesus is really trying not to get people to follow him. He's really trying not to get people to follow him. And he's laying it out on the line and saying, if you're going to become part of what I am doing here, this is so much bigger than it's going to cost you everything you have. And he's saying, it's going to cost me everything I have in a few days' time. But if you're in this for the journey, you will bear fruit. And your life will be caught up into something much, much bigger. And that is the power of whether it's the Matrix, or whether it is Harry Potter, or whether it's Lord of the Rings, all these modern, reworked myths that move so much to children and to young people and still do at this stage, are all to do with the heroes in the middle of the film, again and again, giving up their life for something much bigger so that others can be blessed and benefit. And it's just utterly sad that our society today has become so jaundiced about these things. Our political discourse has become so our world has become so small that we're talking about issues that are on such a kind of small scale that we've lost sight of the bigger stories that are there. And we need to find a way of changing our public discourse into something in which we're not embarrassed to talk about the big themes. We're not embarrassed to talk about people having purpose and meaning in their lives, about having a vision for our society which brings people together from lots of different backgrounds. We still believe in justice and equality and all these things. And rather than politicians in a general election, you're always looking for the lowest common denominator. How can we get votes? What can we offer people to give us their vote? Rather than starting with that, starting what is our vision for what the world can be? And I'll stick everything in that. And they can't do it because they haven't got the foundation or the framework to actually do it. Political narratives in themselves are still earthbound. And as people of faith, we have a bigger frame for this, and it all starts with good old Jeremiah. Because in that wee passage in Jeremiah, you hear for the first time this wonderful phrase, a new covenant. A new covenant. This passage is one of the high points of the Old Testament narrative. Just before this verse, the previous couple of verses, Jeremiah has said something quite radical. He said in his own quintessentially Jeremiah-ic kind of way, he said, it will no longer be the fathers that eat the sour grapes that make the children bitter, but each will be bitter for their own grapes that they eat. You wouldn't say that today, obviously, all right? But what he was trying to say was that in those old understandings, Israel was seen as a collective, spiritually a collective. And so what the parents did wrong was punished onto the children and generations afterwards. It's all a collective thing. We're in it together, for better or for worse. And Jeremiah in this passage suddenly says, because Jeremiah had been told right at the beginning of his life, nobody is going to listen to you. They're not going to listen to you. And they didn't. They all ended up in exile in Babylon, okay? So he was told before we started, nobody is going to listen. But I want you to talk about the narrative anyway. Call them again and again and again. And sometimes we can't be bothered telling people things, but they're not going to listen. Society doesn't want to hear this stuff anymore. It comes around to the passion narrative again. Next Sunday, we're walking around our church car park in a collective piece of public witness, and we think, but nobody's going to notice us. Why bother? It's not the first time this has happened. Jeremiah's been in it as well. But Jeremiah, suddenly, he's and this is a key breakthrough in history of world religion. Jeremiah suddenly realizes it's about God and the individual, not God and the collective. And that there will come a day when he will make a new covenant. Now, Jeremiah doesn't know how, in which God's law will be put into people's hearts. Individually, they will know him. Now, his follower Ezekiel picked this theme up again in exile in Babylon, about 50 years later. And Ezekiel talks about it very powerfully, a heart of stone being replaced with a heart of flesh. So these are really old, deep, and they didn't know how it was going to happen, but they thought this is the only way forward when people change. And of course, this is why we read it on Passion Sunday, because it's on the life of Jesus that is then made possible. That is then made possible. That vision for a deep, personal, transformative knowledge of God that changes us from the inside out. So, where does that leave us then with Holy Week and this rather kind of heavy call about dying and losing your life and hating your life? I mean, it's really not much. You can't do much for this today. And I just want to, in closing, I just want to flip it around to demonstrate that it's not about flights of fancy, to be re-enchanted, to believe again in the deep goodness of deep down things, to believe that there is a goodness, a deep magic at work in the world, in C.S. Lewis's terms, that will keep on rolling on no matter what happens. To have that sense of G.K. Chesterton that this is truly the greatest story ever told. To really grasp that is to know that the way to that wonderful big picture is through the way of sacrifice and service. There's nothing fancy or sexy or spectacular about this. There are no easy ways to discovering God's power in your life apart from the way of service and sacrifice. And I don't mean that to make us all feel guilty, because I know we're all West of Scotland people, so we feel guilty enough already as it is. That's fine, I'm not trying to add to that. But I'm trying to show that just as there are physical laws, gravity, heat, motion, so there are spiritual laws that are equally 100% true. And one of these spiritual laws is the way to full life is through the road of death and sacrifice. And what does that mean? It will mean something different for each one of us. And it will mean something different for each one of us at different stages in our lives. But at essence, it requires us to let go of what we want and trust God for what He wants for our lives. And that could be to do with our money, our time, our relationships, our emotional investment, what we do with in terms of our thinking and how we're working things out in our heads. There's so much it can be involved with. What are we going to get involved in? People like Martin Luther King getting involved in what they did at the time. Or countless people today here in the West of Scotland getting involved in things like food banks and so on. But not just that kind of thing. It's really about a deep internal place where we get to in our lives and we say, I let go. I trust you, God, with my life. I'm willing to do anything. I'll do what it takes. Where do you need me in your story? and the circumstances and the limitations of my life are what they are. I can do almost nothing about them to change them. But like the wee boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, I offer you the mess and circumstances of my life, this passion tide. And as Jesus walked to the cross, I want to walk that walk with him. And I trust that you will do something with that, because I believe that there is something more going on with my life than just the day-to-day. And that you can take the day-to-day of my life and make it something wonderful. There is no doubt, it's just a closing thought, there is no doubt in my mind that a healthy church, and that is totally irrespective of numbers, and I really mean that, it's nothing to do with numbers, a spiritually healthy church is a church where you have enough people in it for whom their faith costs them something. Their faith costs them something. And that will be unique for each individual person, and that will change over their time. And it will cost us all different things in different ways, but nobody is along for the ride. And that's a challenge to me as it is to anybody. So as we enter Passion Sunday, Passion Tide, and all that lies ahead for us on that, I just want to believe in all of you. I believe in all of you, and what God is doing in your lives, that you show up here on Sunday. You want to take part in something, you want to be part of something big. And I don't mean big and spectacular and successful. I mean big in terms of we believe we're part of a big story. And we believe in the deep down goodness of things. And Christ's death and resurrection. Let's be quiet now as we just sit for a couple of moments of silence before we say the creed together.